Hello everyone, this is my week 2 multimedia discussion for the history and theory of public administration. First, I'd like to start out with giving you an overview of my presentation. In my presentation, we're going to be discussing Max Weber and his 6 characteristics of a bureaucracy. And then we're going to move on to Henry Fayol and his 14 principles of management. After that, we're going to delve into the division of work and remuneration. In examining the theories of Max Weber and Henry Fayol, we're going to move that from theory to practice and using the modern day situation, how it applies to public administration in a police department. And then we're going to test the concepts of division of work and remuneration and argue how the division of work still holds true today. And I'm going to provide an argument with remuneration and how that may need to be updated as it relates to a public administrative field. According to Max Weber, he defines 6 characteristics that make up a bureaucracy. 1 is a well-defined formal hierarchy of command. 2 is the management by rules and regulations. 3 is the division of labor and work specialization. 4, managers should maintain an impersonal relationship with their employees. 5, competence and not personality should be the basis for job appointment. And lastly, formal rules, regulations, procedures, decisions, and actions by the organization and its members should be recorded in order to preserve consistency and accountability. When examining Max Weber's characteristics of a bureaucracy and moving it from theory to practice, I believe there can be no greater example of a modern day situation in public administration than the administration of a police department. Here's why. Max Weber's characteristics of a bureaucracy, characteristic number 1, calls for a well-defined formal hierarchy of command. If you look at the organizational chart of a police department, you clearly have a well-defined hierarchy of command. At the bottom of the organizational chart, moving up towards the administration, you begin with an officer, and an officer reports to a corporal then reports to a sergeant reports to the lieutenants report to the captain reports to the deputy chief, and the deputy chief ultimately reports to the top administrator, the chief of police. Second, Weber calls for management by rules and regulations. A police department is managed by its policy and procedures. Each employee of the police department is provided with a department policy and procedures. Inside the department policy and procedures, there's a list of shalls and shall not do's and disciplines for failing to abide by or follow a policy. Everything is outlined in the department policy and procedure. Next, Weber calls for a division of labor and work specialization. If you look at a majority of large departments within Riverside County, San Bernardino County, or Los Angeles County, you'll see that there's a division of labor and work specialization. Assignments will potentially begin in patrol, with continued assignments divided to air support, bike patrol, canine handler, gang investigator, assignment to a traffic division, narcotics investigator, range staff member, SWAT member, crisis response team, explorer advisor, terrorism task force, a multi-enforcement team, and a school resource officer. The options are limitless depending on what agency you're looking to, but there's clearly a division of labor and work specialization in most modern police departments. And next, Weber contends that competence and not personality should be the basis for job appointment. In a police department, although some may argue, I would argue that competence and not personality is the basis for job appointment or potentially job advancement. Typical testing for entry will be written testing or oral testing, which is based on competence, not personality. There's a lot of people that could be very nice people, but they may not be selected to do the job they're interviewing for or seeking to promote based on lacking the competence to do that job. And lastly, Weber contends that formal rules, regulations, procedures, Decisions and actions by the organization and its members should be recorded in order to preserve consistency and accountability. Again, I would return to the department policy and procedures. The department policy and procedures have been organized by department members and administrators, and they have been recorded as our formal rules and regulations. There is no gray in the department policy. There's some shalls and shall nots and should nots, what could be confusing for some, but it's clearly outlined as to what you can and cannot do in our department policies and procedures within a police department. And in Weber's final characteristic of a bureaucracy, he contends that managers should maintain impersonal relationships with their employees. I believe that this is true and exists in most police departments. While officers will fraternize with one another, and sometimes in the case officers and sergeants will fraternize with one another, it's typically uncommon for an officer or sergeant to be hanging out at the captain's house over the weekend or going out to a party or celebrating with the chief outside of a holiday party or something that we would annually do. But for the most case, impersonal relationships with administrators and the employees of a police department do exist. So we know that in the early 1900s, Frederick Wilson Taylor sought to identify the role of management, while Henri Fayol in 1916 builds upon Taylor's principles of the roles of management, and Fayol develops the 14 principles of management, which are the division of labor, authority, discipline, unity of command, unity of direction, subordination, remuneration, centralization, the scholar chain, order, equity, stability of tenure of personnel, initiative, and esprit de corps. While we're not going to delve into each of the 14 principles of management devised by Henri Fayol, we are going to discuss two of those principles that we're going to be discussing later on in this presentation. The first is the division of labor, and the second is remuneration. In moving Henri Fayol's principle of the division of labor into practice with modern-day public administration, you can see with the example of the police department that we've been using that each member of the police department has an individualized responsibility and role that contributes to the greater good of the police department. Patrol is responsible for patrol operations, responding to routine calls. Traffic is responsible for traffic responsibilities, enforcing traffic laws, issuing citations, taking accident-related reports. And then you have investigations, which are going to be handling your crimes that require a lot more time and depth into that case. So everything is divided into different sectors and what one person does. Although we're all contributing to the greater good in the police department, everyone has their role and responsibility or their division of labor within the organization. The next principle of Fayol's that we're going to be examining is remuneration. Much like Taylor, Fayol believed that employees should be paid for their services provided. Yet again, in public administration, the majority of us are not volunteers in our respective fields, and likewise in the police department, the members of the organization are expected to provide a service, and in return they expect to be paid for that service. And not only did Fayol believe that employees should be paid for the services provided, he felt that they should be provided with fair and equitable compensation for the work provided. In doing this, he felt that the employee would be more likely to abandon their own wants and desires and fulfill the greater good of the organization. I believe that Fayol's division of labor, division of work concept still holds true today. If you look at most law enforcement agencies or even a lot of other fields in public administration, they're going to have an organizational chart which lifts everyone in their titles, which include their division of work. If you see here on this chart here, beginning at the chief of police and ending in support at the very bottom there. I know it's hard to see because this is the most that I could cram in there, and still parts of the charts are cut off. But there is a strong division of labor that takes place in the field of public administration, especially in the field of police work. And so I do believe that Andre Fayol's principle of division of labor still holds true today. So, like Taylor, Fayol believed that employees should be compensated for the work provided. But in his seventh principle of remuneration, he expands on that. He expands on that in elaborating that there's also more than one type of compensation. There's the monetary compensation, which comes in our paychecks or a bonus. And then there's also the non-monetary compensation, which is a compliment or giving the employee some additional responsibilities and credits. And additionally, Fayol believed that the employee should receive a fair and equitable wage, and he articulated that a lot of the working conditions are going to be based on the productivity and success of that employee. And this is an area that I feel that the public sector could use an update or change in this principle of remuneration. Oftentimes, you'll find that public agencies in a more impoverished area are expected to provide the same type of resources and execute the same type of responsibilities, but oftentimes with far less resources than another area of agency within a public sector may have. You'll see in your I know for one example, in police departments, in more impoverished areas, those people that work within that public agency are paid far less than the departments, maybe let's say in the city of Irvine, the safest city in the United States. They get paid significantly more, but one could argue that if you're working in a more impoverished area with more crime, that you're going to be working significantly harder. However, your pay is not going to relate across the field. And that is one area that I feel that the field of public administration could use an update or a change. Well, I'd like to thank you guys for watching. In closing, hopefully I provided you with a better understanding of Max Weber and his characteristics of bureaucracy, and Henri Fayol and his 14 principles of management, well, which include the division of work and remuneration, which we address their concepts and how they're applicable, or maybe could use some update in current public administration. So once again, thanks you guys for watching, and I look forward to watching your presentations.